Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to review Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know by Adam Grant. This book was published in 2021 by Viking Books, which is an imprint of Penguin, and the hardcover comes in at 320 pages. I read this book as an ebook. It was a free review copy that I received through NetGalley. Adam Grant is a professor of organizational psychology at the Wharton School, which is the University of Pennsylvania's business school. And at the time that he was tenured, he was actually the youngest ever person to receive tenure at Wharton. He was only 28 years old. And this book, Think Again, is actually his fourth book. His previous books include Give and Take, Originals, and his most recent release was one that he co-authored with Lean In author Sheryl Sandberg. They called their book Option B. In this new book, Adam Grant talks about a concept that he likes to call rethinking, which basically means taking a second or third, fourth, or fifth look at the opinions that we hold currently, periodically reevaluating them based on any new evidence or information that we may have that may or may not contradict those previous opinions. And really, it's a book about giving ourselves the space to change our minds. A lot of us, especially here on the internet, tend to have very strong opinions about important things and unimportant things alike. It's one of the reasons why when you go into the comment section of any big website or even a big channel here on YouTube, it's kind of similar to watching a boxing match. People have very strong opinions and they are more than willing to defend them. But if you've ever seen one of those types of situations go down here on the internet, as I'm sure you have, they're happening all the time everywhere across the internet. It almost seems unavoidable at this point. But you may have noticed that not a whole lot tends to be accomplished by the end of one of those situations. It's really a best case scenario when all parties involved can just agree to disagree and then go on about their lives. I have very rarely, if ever, seen someone exit one of those situations having completely changed their mind. I don't think the internet is entirely to blame for all of these disagreements. I think for the most part, it's just providing a platform upon which people can have disagreements that they were going to have anyway, even if it was in person. But I do think the root cause of a lot of the acrimony that we see across the internet is, unsurprisingly, human psychology. It's about the way we originally form our opinions, the way we take those opinions and attach them to our identities, and how those opinions, wrong or right, can become more deeply rooted when anyone wants to challenge them. These tendencies that we all have as people, it's just part of our brain programming, can really get in the way of our personal and our professional growth. So in a similar way that you would take your car to the shop for routine maintenance, or for a major repair if something was really wrong with it, we need those kinds of regular tune-ups to the way we see the world. But we can only do that if we allow ourselves the space to rethink our opinions, especially ones that we've held on to for a very long time. There might be rust on those. The purpose of this book is to show the reader the value in rethinking. And once Adam Grant has done that in the first part, he moves on to the second part in which he wants to encourage you to take it on as a lifelong practice. This is not a one and done kind of thing. This will be something that you need to do all your life long. And hopefully you will get to experience the benefits of doing this your entire life if you do adopt it as a regular practice. And then in the third part, he teaches you how to persuade others. If you've read any of Adam Grant's previous books, or really if you've read any books in this style, then I'm sure it won't surprise you to learn that in Think Again, Adam Grant mixes psychology, findings from psychological studies, with anecdotes, sometimes personal anecdotes. For instance, at the very beginning of the book, he's trying to give us an example of what can happen to a company if the head of that company isn't willing to rethink their original concept, if they're totally absorbed by this one idea of what customers might want, that they actually ignore the changing realities around them. The example company that he's talking about is BlackBerry, which is the company that pretty much kickstarted the entire smartphone revolution, whatever you want to call it. If you've never heard of BlackBerry before, Well, that's kind of the point. Toward the beginning of the book, he also breaks down the different modes that we as people tend to go into when we're looking to defend our previously held opinions. So there's preacher mode, politician mode, and prosecutor mode. But he actually argues in this section and then throughout the book that we should actually be approaching these things like scientists, where we have an original idea of how something might work. We're continuously testing it, making sure it holds up. And if it doesn't, we're ready to abandon it because we're not looking to be right. We're looking to find the truth. Branching off of that, there's a really fun section in this book that basically just talks about the joy of being wrong, how being wrong doesn't have to be something negative. And he talks about how a lot of scientists relish being wrong, how they see that as something really exciting because they're now one step closer to knowing the right way of doing things. And how if we close ourselves off from even the idea of being wrong, we're closing ourselves off from learning. That was one of the sections that I found the most meaningful in this book, but I also got a lot out of the third section where he's teaching us how to be persuasive. A lot of the methods that people say to use when you're trying to get someone to see your perspective, like putting yourself in someone else's shoes, those types of methods counterintuitively can actually help to reinforce someone else's beliefs. After showing that a lot of those very typical methods don't tend to work through findings from research studies, he does present you with some alternative things that are a little bit more likely to work. I won't lay out what those are here. That's what the book is there for if you want to go and read it. But I think it made a lot of sense. It's definitely going to be changing the way I approach other people when I'm trying to get them to see my side of things. There's a ton in this book, actually, that I plan on applying to my own life. I want to be the type of individual who is a lifelong learner. I don't want to let the fear, the shame, potential shame of being wrong hold me back from learning. So there's a lot in this book that I took to heart. I really like these styles of books that mix a psychology element, but also a human element. I've heard them referred to as pop psychology books before, and I'll admit to not being the biggest fan of that label because I find it a little bit dismissive of what I see to be a really valuable combination of science, but also human stories, personal stories. I think the blend of those two things really can take what are sometimes very complex issues and make them more understandable, really drive them home for the reader. And that's what I found in this book. I also happen to really like Adam Grant's writing style and the way that he approached this work in general. I mean, he's obviously very knowledgeable. He has a lot of firsthand experience. He has a lot of education, and he did a ton of research for this book. So he is an expert, but the book is very approachable. He writes it in a way that is not at all condescending. And I feel like in these types of books that are kind of self-helpy, the author sometimes flirts with that line of putting themselves above their reader, and I didn't feel that for 1 minute in this book. I think what helps make this book feel so approachable is the fact that Adam Grant is ready and willing to apply any and all of these principles to himself. He talks about how he outgrew this kind of know-it-all phase that he had when he learned how people were responding to it and how he was coming across to people. And he also talks about several different instances of changing his mind, including something I found very, very impressive. He actually changes his mind about something that he said in his previous book, Originals. There's one opinion that he had when he was writing Originals that he stated in the book, but now he has new information, and so he changed his mind about it. I can't even imagine what that must feel like as a published author. It's not like something like a YouTube video where if I put up a video on this channel and later on in my life I feel it doesn't represent me anymore, I can remove it out of circulation. Adam Grant really can't do that with Originals. It's in writing, it's on library shelves, it's on people's personal shelves. I'm sure there must be a tendency of published authors to dig their heels in when it comes to published works because they feel like, okay, my opinion is out there in writing. I have to stand behind it forever, whether or not I agree with it. And I think by contradicting that in this book, Adam Grant proves that it's wrong, that you don't have to. You don't have to keep believing something, even if it is in writing out there. You're still able to change your mind. I think it shows an incredible amount of maturity on Adam Grant's part. I really love the example that sets. And I also think it shows just how seriously he takes this topic. He's willing to do it himself. I think the only thing I would change about this book is something that would have been entirely outside of this author's control, so I can't fault him for it. It's just something I felt desirous of as a reader, and that's the discussion surrounding the coronavirus pandemic. It is briefly mentioned in the introduction, but it must have been written around the time when everything was starting, because he talks about how the habit of rethinking is more important now than it ever has been, especially dealing with the coronavirus, because things were changing on a day-to-day basis. So you had to have the flexibility to change your mind whenever new information about the virus was coming in. We were still learning about it, so you had to have that flexibility. It's part of the reason why I don't like introductions that discuss the global situation, because the author has to write them so many months in advance that as soon as that book comes out, that information is going to feel very stale. I also don't really feel it's necessary to have news as part of my introduction. I don't think every single book on earth needs to acknowledge the pandemic, but I am sure I'm going to be reading a metric ton of those types of introductions this year. But a discussion that I would actually like to hear that ties this book to the global situation, whether it's Adam Grant having the discussion or somebody else having the discussion, is how the pandemic situation has forced us all to rethink about the way we do things. For example, virtual learning or work from home policies. I personally have worked for companies that have been so restrictive about working from home because higher ups, typically from a previous generation, have this notion that working from home is a luxury when a lot of us now know that that is far from being true. I also personally have seen a lot of local businesses here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania take very different approaches to this whole situation. I've seen some of them look at it like, okay, this is the new normal. How are we going to pivot and make sure that our business makes it? We're going to do everything that it takes. And then I've seen other businesses and other industries just kind of hang back and wait for things to go back to normal, which may or may not happen. So I do think a willingness to rethink, a willingness to see the world for what it is right now and not for what it was previously could possibly be a determining factor in why some businesses make it and others don't. Obviously, the ability to rethink varies by industry, but you see how it applies. I feel like what that illustrates really well, though, is that this subject isn't just applicable to personal development. This isn't just a self-help kind of subject. It really can be applicable across a number of different subjects and in a number of different things that we see going on in the world. And because of that reason, and because this book is so approachable and so enjoyable to read, I think you would enjoy this even if you don't typically read this kind of book. So that was my opinion on Think Again by Adam Grant, at least as it stands right now. If you have any comments or questions about the book, about this subject matter, or about anything in general, please feel free to leave that in my comment section below. But if you would like to keep up with what I'm reading, you can find me on social media. The links to all of my profiles are in the description box below. And also in the description box below, there will be a further reading section where I will recommend some books that I think you may enjoy if you really loved this one. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.